Love you. Love you too.
That moment from the 2023 film Skinamarink was one of the most heartbreaking scenes I've ever seen in a film. Hearing these two siblings say that they love each other despite their circumstances was enough to break me. But what is happening to them? Skinamarink is written and directed by Kyle Edward Ball. Kyle started to gain fame on YouTube from his channel, Bite-Sized Nightmares, where he would make short films based off of actual people's real nightmares. I could get more into the short films from Kyle Edward Ball, but for now I want to talk about his first feature film, Skinamarink. One common theme that Kyle noticed in people's nightmares was that a lot of people had a nightmare from their childhood where they were alone in their house at night and there was some kind of monster that they had to deal with, which is essentially the plot of Skinamarink in a nutshell. But to make it simpler, it's just 100 minutes of the worst vibes imaginable. I personally had a nightmare when I was about 7 where I was alone and the walls would light up, almost like lightning, and whenever they lit up they would talk to me. And to this day, that dream has stuck with me. Kyle's style is explained as lo-fi experimental that has kind of developed from the analog horror boom in recent years. It looks like it was filmed on an old camera, there is very little dialogue, and most of the characters are not in frame. And to put it blunt, it's not for everybody. A 72% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, a 44% audience score, 5.0 rating on IMDb, and a 2.9 up and down graph on Letterboxd are all the proof that we need to know that audiences are very divided on this film. And that's okay. I love some movies that people hate. I don't like some movies that people love, because all film is subjective. What works for you might not work for me, and vice versa. I've also seen people mock this film and just film their house with a grainy filter over it as a way to show that they're doing what this movie did. And honestly, that kind of irritates me, because the difference between that and what this movie is doing is the plot and the aura that this movie gives off. We know there's something evil in the house, and we're constantly trying to see it in places that it may or may not be. That's why I think it's such a weak argument to say that Skinamarink doesn't have a plot, because there clearly is. It's just not filmed in the traditional sense, which, like I said, is okay if you don't like that. But I'm here to analyze the plot that there is, so let's get into Skinamarink. In my opinion, Skinamarink is best seen in a dark room with no distractions. I was able to see it in a theater, but since it's out of theaters, I would just try to emulate that experience as best as possible. So the film starts by telling us that it's 1995, which I'm just going to assume was around the time that Kyle Edward Ball was the same age as our protagonists. This movie is actually shot in Ball's childhood home, which makes me think that this movie is kind of based off of a dream that he might have had as a kid, or at least this movie was made with the intention of being nostalgic to him. Another intention of this movie was to make it feel like an old movie made in modern day, shown by how the credits are over the opening of the film. We're introduced to our protagonists, Kaylee and Kevin, played by these two phenomenal child actors. And by introduced, we're introduced to them from the knees down. Now at face value, I could see how some of these scenes are just kids playing with their toys, but after the credits, we see Legos on the ground, and the camera shows a doorway with just a black hallway. We never see anything in this hallway, but it taps into that childhood fear that people have, where they think they see things in the dark. There's nothing there, but if you look hard enough, you can trick yourself into actually seeing something. I like to think that this is a way of actually showing that something is there in the dark without actually showing it. Like maybe all those times you thought you saw something in the dark, maybe you actually did. We cut around the house for a bit and take in the environment that we're going to be spending the next 100 minutes in. Again, everything is dark, so you're supposed to be questioning whether or not something is actually there or not. A door creaks open and we see Kevin sitting in the hallway next to a nightlight. Someone opens a closet door. We only see it from the top, so it creates the question of, did a child open this door or did something else? Someone takes out some towels, I think, and we still don't see who is taking them. Kaylee asks, "Are you hiding?" and begins to count. It seems like a harmless game of hide and seek until we hear a tumble down the steps followed by Kevin's crying. Kevin has fallen down the steps, and we hear a car taking off to take him to the hospital. This is where people's take on this movie seems to split. Some people think that Kevin went into a coma and the rest of the film is him dreaming while he's in a coma. I'm torn on what to think. It could be actually happening, or it could be the coma dream, but I want to approach this movie as if it were actually happening in real life. I think Kaylee was actually asking this entity, "Are you hiding?" And maybe this entity gave off a friendly persona at first. Whatever this entity is, it's already in the house because it's seemingly watching cartoons and shuts them off when the family gets back home, possibly not wanting the father to know that it's there. The father calls someone and says that Kevin is fine, he just fell down the steps and needed stitches. What's important to note is that the mother is not present. Kyle Edward Ball made it a point to say that the father ends up disappearing and doesn't mention what happens to the mother. Part of the coma theory is that the father is abusive and is the one who pushed Kevin down the steps. From here on is where the horror starts. Kaylee goes to talk to her father, but he is gone. The windows and door on this house have vanished, and the film shows it in such a unique way by showing the windows and then showing a blank wall. We hear kids wandering the house and calling out for their father and questioning where the windows went. The kids try to use the phone but aren't able to call out. At first they don't seem too bothered by the father being gone, and they choose to sleep downstairs and watch cartoons. Them not being bothered could play into the theory that the father is abusive and they just don't care if he's gone. Anyway, I think some of the cartoons are symbolic. Like this one is called Balloon Land, where everyone is made out of balloons, but there is an evil person called the Pincushion Man who tries to pop everyone. And at one point, he chases after a little boy and a little girl. The kids turn off the lights and go to bed, but first they exchange "I love yous," which just perfectly captures the innocence of these two children and just makes you feel terrible for them. The long shots of the hallway at night are just perfect because it's like a constant presence is watching over these two. Or it's just the viewer tricking themselves into thinking that they see something. When they wake up, we could hear the Pincushion Man talking on the cartoon and bragging about how people hate him and are afraid of him. Aside from the windows and doors being gone, one of the first clues we're shown that something is here is the fact that the nightlights have been unplugged, and it's shown by simply showing a nightlight on the floor. Kaylee goes into her dad's bedroom, and I noticed that this is the only light she doesn't turn on. I think she might be content with the father being gone, and if he is in the bedroom, she's just pretending like he's not. Almost like she is like half looking for him. We see a dark hallway that night, and one of the children asks, "Why is mom crying?" This is the first mention of the mother in this film, and Kevin doesn't reply. He asks her why no one has come yet, and Kaylee says she doesn't know. I'm not sure of the symbolism of this cartoon, but it's called The Song of the Birds, and it's about a kid who shoots a bird and kills it, and at the bird's funeral, it wakes up, and all of the birds start dancing and celebrating. Maybe it doesn't mean anything, but it's interesting nonetheless. That night they hear a couple loud noises, so if you happen to be falling asleep while watching this film, you're woken up by jump scares. The noise was actually the chair hitting the ceiling and sticking to it. Rightfully so, the kids are finally spooked and decide to be quiet. Kevin suggests that maybe the father went with mom, and Kaylee says she doesn't want to talk about mom. So with the mother being a touchy subject, and Kevin suggesting that the father went with her, I think the mother is dead, and Kaylee thinks that the father died too. Kevin wakes up, and just to show you how evil this thing is, it took the toilet away. Kaylee starts investigating and sees her dolls floating on the ceiling. She gets scared and in the process scares us and runs away. The kids decide to use a bucket for a toilet. When the kids are sleeping, a voice calls Kaylee upstairs. And if this were me, there's no way I'd go, but she goes anyway. When she gets upstairs, she gets to the dad's bedroom, and he's just sitting on the edge of the bed. And this is honestly one of the scariest scenes I've ever witnessed. Just seeing the father sitting in the dark room just gives me chills. The father tells her to look under the bed, and I think the audience is supposed to anticipate a big jump scare, but it doesn't come. And I think it's for the better, because any type of unsettling feeling you get is better than any jump scare. Kaylee tells her dad that she can't see anything, and her father is gone, and then the mother is sitting on the bed. This is the first time we could see that this entity can kind of shapeshift into anything. Her mother tells her that her and her father love the kids very much, and she needs Kaylee to close her eyes. The screen goes black to show that Kaylee has closed her eyes, and we're still waiting for the jump scare, and the tension is mounting, but still nothing. When she opens her eyes, the mother is gone. We can see into another dark doorway, which is, I think, a closet. And the mother tells Kaylee, "There's something here." And we hear some strange noise in there, which could be this thing like shape-shifting back to whatever it actually is. And then we get a jump scare and we see a hand, which is presumably the entity's hand, reaching out, and it cuts away. Kevin has been watching cartoons while this happened. This time it's called The Cobweb Hotel, and it shows a spider torturing two small flies, which is an obvious symbol to this movie Skinamarink itself. Kaylee tells Kevin to help her move the couch to presumably keep whatever she saw upstairs and away from them. It's almost like they create a fortress to kind of keep them safe. They move the couch, we see some Legos, and Kevin gets Kaylee some juice just to tug at the heartstrings a little bit. Kevin asks Kaylee what happened upstairs, and she never tells him because she doesn't want to scare her younger brother. In one of the shots of the dark hallway, we hear the mother's distorted voice again calling out for Kaylee. If ever there were any downtime in the film, this is it, because we just see some shots of toys on the wall, and we see Kevin going to the bathroom. This is the first time that Kevin is called out, and he's told to go to the basement. We hear Kaylee in a very muffled voice saying that she feels strange and that she's scared. We see a shot of her legs, and she's sitting down Indian style, and then there's a big jump scare, and we see Kaylee's eyes and mouth are gone. They're pretty much just covered in skin now. Some might say this is a cheap jump scare, but I disagree. I think it's more of a way to show the severity of what happened to Kaylee. She's not dead, she just doesn't have the ability to see or talk anymore. We hear the panicked breathing of a child, and then the breathing quiets, and we can guess that there has been some sort of a time jump, but we don't really know how long it is. A Betty Boop cartoon is shown, and it depicts a character trying to leave a house, but whenever they open the door, there is another door there. This thing calls out for Kevin's name. Kevin responds back with hello. The entity tells him to go to sleep, and we see a juice box drop to the floor. It's revealed that whatever this entity is, it has the ability to put people to sleep, or do whatever it wants. If you subscribe to the coma theory, you might think that these are Kevin's final moments, and that this is the moment that he died. But since we're not talking about that in this video, I think Kevin is just sleeping. The cartoon Presto Changeo is playing, and it pauses. It keeps rewinding and playing the same clip from the cartoon where a bunny shrinks itself and disappears. I've seen people say that the entity just likes part of this cartoon, which is a theory that I love, and an artist posted a tweet about her design for the Skinamarink monster and took elements from the cartoon. Her name is Audie Toddy, if you're interested, but I love the idea of the Skinamarink entity loving this rabbit design and trying to shapeshift into it. This childlike personality comes out again when Kevin starts playing with his toys, and this entity says, "I want to play," and Kevin just ignores it. So we keep hearing the entity demand that he wants to play, and the Presto Changeo bunny sound starts again on repeat. And for months I've had this damn noise stuck in my head because of this movie. When the noise stops, Kevin is gone. He's been taken to the other room, and we hear some rummaging in the kitchen. The entity tells Kevin to put the knife in his eye. We see a very quick shot of Kevin from behind. He's sitting on the floor and kind of jolts back. Then we hear Kevin's crying. It goes quiet, and we see some shots of blood on the walls and the cabinets, and Kevin is told to wake up. Keep in mind this is all because Kevin ignored this entity's request to play with his toys. The TV is now showing a white screen, but we hear the cheerful music of the cartoons until it distorts and cuts out. We sit in silence for a bit until we see the mom standing in the doorway, and then she sits in front of the TV. We never see her face, but we see her from the back like how Kaylee saw her sitting on the bed earlier. I think that this entity can't make faces, and that's why we always see it from the back. And we'll get more into this theory at the end of the movie. Kevin calls 911 and finally gets a hold of an operator. I think this is the entity finally allowing Kevin to call out of the house, because earlier in the movie, they tried to call out of the house and weren't able to get a hold of anybody. Kevin explains that he hurt himself and he feels sick. When the operator asks if anyone else is in the house, he says no. Kevin explains that the doors and the windows are gone, and the operator tells him to stay on the phone, and they'll send grown-ups. We see the phone drop, and then it turns into a toy phone. We're shown a black hallway and we hear the entity laughing at Kevin, further making me think that this whole 911 call was just this monster playing a prank on Kevin, and giving this kid the false sense of hope after you just made him stab himself in the eye just breaks my heart. So Kevin asked the entity how it did that with the phone, and it says that it can do anything. It also explains that Kaylee didn't do what she was told, and she kept asking for her parents, so it took her eyes and her mouth away. It then tells Kevin to come upstairs, and I don't know if it's just me, this command seems like more direct and more serious this time. This becomes like a House of Leaves situation as we hear Kevin start to cry. We realize that he's been walking on the ceiling. This thing is altering reality beyond just removing an escape now. I want to point out that from this point on, there were a lot of things that are up to interpretation. What I take from it might not be the right answer, and it might not be what you came up with either. So feel free to share your thoughts with me in the comments and let's have a discussion. So a light comes on, and we see that all of the toys and the tape recorder from the beginning of the film are on the ceiling. I like to think that this is the entity's toy box, or the toys that he's collected since he's been here. We're quietly shown that it's been 572 days that Kevin and Kaylee have been in this hellscape. There's a toy house that's kind of tilted in the background, and while it could just be one of the toys with no deeper meaning, I'm choosing to think that the house is symbolic because it's on his side to kind of like show that the entity has messed with things in this house. We slowly zoom out on the hallway and see that the hallway is now at an unrealistic length, further adding to the House of Leaves vibe. Also, if you haven't read House of Leaves, I can't recommend it enough. Without spoiling anything, it's about a house that is bigger on the outside than it is on the inside, and the house morphs shapes and whatnot. If you know, you know. Grave Encounters is a way less serious vibe of what I'm describing, which is a very underrated found footage movie, which I may or may not talk about at some point. Anyway, as we zoom out, we see that the light at the end of the hallway looks like a flashlight pointing up, kind of symboling just how far removed from reality this place is now. I think this is confirmed by the sound of a light switch, and then the light goes off. Then we see Kaylee sitting on the bed, very similar to how her mom was sitting on the bed early on. Kaylee begins to fade out in a very similar way to the Presto Changeo rabbit, like an up and down fade out. Also, the way Kaylee is now acting very similar to her mother makes me think that her mother may have suffered a similar fate at some point. It's just a kind of a theory I have off the top of my head that I might get into in another episode. I am curious to kind of talk about some other theories on Skinamarink that I haven't mentioned in this movie, so if you're curious on more videos about this movie, let me know. Anyway, we're shown the house from afar. The house is isolated from anything else, and it seems to be in like this weird realm. I think it could just simply be showing where this house is at, because this house doesn't have a door, and the windows seem to be blacked out. We see from the kids' point of view that they keep turning on a flashlight and investigating the house. In one of the scariest parts of the film, we're shown two eyes in the dark, but when a light is flashed on these eyes, it becomes a toy phone. This is like a perfect representation of a child thinking that they see something in the dark when they don't. Like when I was a kid, I remember thinking that I was seeing a Michael Myers mask out of the corner of my eye in the middle of the night, but when I would go to look at it, it would be gone. But this just gives a feeling of safety when we see that it's just the phone, until one of the best jump scares ever kicks in. We're shown some pictures of kids without faces and without heads, and I've heard people say that these are just baby pictures of Kevin and Kaylee, but to possibly make this even more scary, I kind of think that these are just pictures of previous kids that this entity has kidnapped or came into contact with. There's a big blood splatter on the floor, and Kaylee screams. Now, unfortunately, I think this is Kaylee's death. But even worse, the entity is using the Presto Changeo technique and reversing time and killing her over and over again. So Kaylee is dying, time is being reversed, and then Kaylee is dying again. We even hear the entity laughing after one of these times, and Kaylee calls out for her mom, and it cuts. And like I said earlier, just a heartbreaking fate that these two children have. Kevin asks the entity if he can watch something happy, which seems to be his go-to because the whole time they've been watching cartoons despite being in this hellscape. So I can't take credit for this theory. This goes to Flaw Peacock, which check out his Skinamarink video. It's fantastic. But Kevin is shown a door, and the door could very well be the happy thing that Kevin is watching. He's been stuck in this house with no doors, so being shown a door to leave would have to be the best thing he could possibly think of. When Kevin approaches the door, it fades out, and slowly the cheerful music fades out, and we start to see a blank face come into frame. Its face is out of focus, and my theory for this, like I said, is that this entity can't make a face. Earlier, when it became the parents, they're only shown from behind, and here we only see like a vague white face. We don't actually see like any features or anything. Kevin is told to go to sleep, and then Kevin asks, "What's your name?" Creepily enough, if you look hard enough, you can kind of see this thing trying to create a smile, but then it just cuts away and the film ends. I like to think that somehow Kevin was put out of his misery, but honestly this ending could be something much darker, and Kevin is unfortunately with this thing forever. Like I said, I just love that this movie has the balls to show these terrible things happening to children. It's such a risky thing that a lot of films don't do, and it's honestly one of the most heartbreaking horror movies that I can remember watching. It's just bad vibes all around. It's a great film, but bad vibes all around. I vividly remember the silence in the theater when this film ended. Everyone kind of seemed lost and confused, and it was a feeling that I've never had when I left a theater before. One guy got up and said it was a waste of time, and then you could slowly hear people start discussing things. The weird vibe after the film matched the vibe during the film. And I seem to have fallen more in love with this film as time went on. It's such a dark, bleak, and depressing story that sticks with you long after it's over. I think Kyle Edward Ball did a fantastic job of capturing this childhood nightmare, and I don't think I've ever seen this tone done in such an effective way. Anyway, I wanted to get this video together and into the ether because I'm perfectly okay if people don't like films that I personally love, but to just say this movie doesn't have a plot is kind of like undermining the greatness of this film. Even Kyle Edward Ball said that the plot has a narrative structure, but it's just filmed in such a unique way that isn't for everybody, and I think that's kind of where people fell off from this movie and kind of checked out and didn't pick up on the key plot points, which is pretty much just why I wanted to make this video and kind of explain that there is a plot to this movie. Once again, if you don't like it, you don't like it, and that's perfectly fine. I like movies that people don't like, and I don't like some movies that people love. It's just artist subjective, and that's just how life goes. So if we all like the same things, everything would be boring. So let's have a discussion whether you liked or did not like the film. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and I think I do want to delve into the coma theory in another video, so if you guys want to see that, let me know. I also want to point out that one interesting critique of this film was people saying that it was too long, and it could have been a short film. Well, let's talk about Kyle Edward Ball's short film, Heck, soon.